In this lesson, we will just get started at taking a look at what makes up a database and how we get around it, how we can get information out of it. One thing that it's important to note as you begin the class is that you already have experience with databases. It's not something that you've never encountered before. You encounter databases every day. If you go shopping, if you go to a doctor's appointment, when you register for school, when you look up information on a search engine, all of that is maintained and those tasks are accomplished using a database. We specifically will be looking at what makes up a database, and that's probably something you may not have ever thought about before, but you will actually get to the point where you will create a database from the ground up using just a business scenario. So what we're looking at in this lesson, there's a database that's already created, and you'll just be getting familiar with the one that's already there. But you will actually get to the point where you can look at a business scenario and then create a database yourself. We specifically will be using Access software to do this, and but just note that there are many software packages available for database maintenance. Specifically in industry, you may have heard of SQL or Oracle, DB2. Those are packages that are usually used for enterprise-wide database, relational database management. So taking a look at our first objective, identifying basic database structure. A database, what you'll notice in lesson 1 is that you're going to download a file with a file extension of .accdb. That stands for Access Database. But within that file, what you're going to find are the objects that make up that database. So there are going to be multiple objects within that one file. And this is how a database is structured. First of all, we have tables of information. That is the major organizational object inside of a database. This stores all the data based on a particular subject. So we might have a table of customers. We might have a table of invoices. We might have a table of locations or buildings. And all of the information about that particular object in that database is going to be found in what we call records. That's a complete set of related data about that one, and I'm using the word object. I should probably not use that word because the tables, records, and fields are actually objects, but I like to think of the items that we maintain in a table as an object or a noun, something that you can touch, feel, a person, place, or thing. So the records are, you can think of them as rows of information with related data about that one noun. Now the terms that you're seeing here are entity or activity. That's another way to refer to an item that might be maintained inside of a table. And just looking specifically at what we have in this example in figure 1-1 on the example on this slide, we have records of information, and it doesn't really tell us what this table is representing, but we can imagine that it might be customers or it might be students. It obviously has names and addresses and phone numbers, so it's something that relates to people. But people can be customers, or people can be students, or people can be employees. So this table probably has a name like that, and we are maintaining records of information that contain address information and phone number information from what we can see here. Now if we break that record down, each record contains several fields, and the fields that we would see in the record shown here in the example for Kimberly Martin is maintaining her last name in one field, the first name in another field, the street address in a third field, and the phone number in that last field there. So each of those individual fields, parts of the record, or you might think of them as columns if you're thinking of them in terms of like an Excel spreadsheet. Each of those are considered a field, and they make up the records. So we can take a look at this hierarchy of information here, that we have multiple fields like the first name, last name, phone number, and so forth. Each of those fields, related fields, are put together in one record that maintains information about one entity or person, place, or thing in that table. And the table is made up of multiple records, and then a database is made up of multiple tables. So in a database we might have a table of customers and a table of products and maybe a table of orders and so on and so on. And they're all related in some way. Now inside of Access you're going to find that there are major objects. We've already talked about the table. It stores data about people, activities, items, and events. Queries are questions that we make of the table that allow us to display information out of the tables. And the queries are generally a subset. They pull back a subset of records from a table. A form is a way of displaying the data and allowing users to input data. And generally when you look at a database, say for shopping or for as a search engine or something like that, you're presented with a limit of what you can do to that database. You can't change any records in the database, or there are certain things that you will never see in the database because there's a form presented to you that kind of protects the data that is not to be shown or not to be changed. And so that we'll be learning how to do that. The form basically provides the user interface for the database. And then reports, we all know what reports are. They're nice printable formats of data. So we can pull different organizations of the data. We can group in different ways, subtotal and total, grand total, and just show the data in different ways for different purposes. Again, this is showing that overall we have tables at the core of a database, and within those tables we have records, and we can ask questions of that table. How many users are at location 5? And then expect to get a subset of the table that shows us the answer to that question. And then forms are the user interface, and the reports are the printable hard copy sets of data that we need to get out of the table. In Objective 2, we'll be working with it. We'll actually get into the Access database. There has been a file provided for you called Ecomed, and that is we'll be working with this database file throughout the course. I have loaded that file in your assignment for the first lesson exercises, but if you bought the book new, you'll also, if it came with a CD, you would find it on that. You can also find it on the Student Companion website, which you should find a link to in Blackboard, but it's there for you in the assignment, so you don't need to go looking for it. What this is talking about, though, is that a database file is just like any other file, like an Excel file or a Word file, a picture file. It can be located in a folder, and I would suggest that you create a location, or you decide on a location either on your computer or on a USB flash drive that you are going to store the files that you work on for this class. You can download the original files and then also save the changed files in that location. And I would also suggest that you create a separate folder for each lesson so that you can keep everything organized and you'll know what files you're going to be uploading to Blackboard for which lesson. So when we open up an Access database, we use, in Access 2010, we're going to use the File tab. If you were using Access 2007, it would be on the Office button. Hopefully everybody's using Access 2010. It will make life a lot easier. But we use the Open button on the File tab, and this is called, for Office 2010, that File tab is called the Backstage area. So once the file is open, we'll see several things. First of all, that yellow bar across the top will generally be there when we first open up a file. And it's telling us that some active content has been disabled, and and it also provides a button called Enable Content. That is something that when you're opening up a file for this course, you can feel comfortable with clicking that button to enable content. It is something, though, that you need to be aware of. Any file, like a database file, can contain viruses because it is able to hold programming elements, and so someone could implant a virus inside an Access database file. But if the file comes from a trusted source, you can feel comfortable in opening it, but always be aware that that is a risk when you click on that button to enable content. This shows you the parts of the Access window, and it's very similar to other Office applications if you're familiar with them. Again, we take a look at the File menu, the Backstage menu. There's a Quick Access toolbar. The title bar tells you what program you're in and what your file name is. The ribbon that contains all of the various tabs, the File, Home, Create, External Data. We'll be getting very familiar with that. We talked about the message bar already, and then the navigation pane that shows us all of the various objects that are contained in that database that we just opened. Specifically, we can take a look at the navigation pane, and we can show this in various ways. First of all, the category bar tells us how we are looking at the objects in the database. In this example, we're looking at all of the Access objects, which means that it's going to list all of the tables, all of the queries, all of the forms, and all of the reports in order. So it will have them grouped by those categories. Tables and then a list, queries and then a list, and so forth. But there are different ways of viewing them, and we'll talk about those as we go along. The shutter bar, those double arrows, when you see those generally mean that they are to be used for expanding or collapsing something. So the shutter bar open close button, as it shows in this example, it's pointing to the left. If I were to click that, it's going to collapse that navigation pane out of the way so that I don't see it anymore. Same thing with the tables open close button there. It is, if I click that button as it's pointing upward, I'm going to collapse that list of tables so that they are no longer shown. And so it's just a matter of getting used to how that works. There is a drop-down arrow on the category bar, and like I said, we were looking at that list where we saw tables, and then we saw the list of tables, and then we would see queries, and then the list of queries underneath it. But this shows us that we can change that view. It was showing us object type and all Access objects. Those are the arrows that are checked in that list. But you will be asked to view things in a little different way from here and there in the course. Not a big deal. Again, you should all be familiar with the command tabs on the ribbon in the Office products. Just shows you some of the specific tabs here that we'll find in Access. Some that you may not be familiar with. When we go to create an object like a table or a form or a report, we will use that Create tab. When we want to import or export data into the database or export it out of the database, we'll use the External Data tab. And then database tools will allow us to do certain things like look at the relationships between tables. Now, the prefixes shown here are what we call a convention. They are not required. I can name a table anything I want to name it. But in this book and in industry, there are certain conventions that allow for better documentation of a database. And what I mean by that is that when you create a database, you're creating it for a group of people to use generally. And you also are creating it so that someone might be able to come in and make changes to it. And it helps if things are labeled such that the folks that need to maintain it can understand what they are or can easily see what they are. And in order to do this, sometimes it makes it a little bit better if you give your objects certain conventions. For instance, when you create a table, to add the prefix TBL so that no matter what person comes after you to maintain or to try to understand that database, they can look at that object and know that it's a table. And for queries, to prefix them with the QRY. And you'll see how this works when we actually get into creating these objects. But just for you to know that this is not only in this course, but many times in enterprise-wide databases, you will see naming conventions on objects like tables, queries, forms, and reports. So to open a table, basically you're going to double-click it. And you could also right-click and choose from the shortcut menu. In this example, in Figure 1-10, we're taking a look at the table inventory. And it would show up in the workspace in Access. The Document tab tells us what object is open, so that tells us that the inventory table is open. And the table would be highlighted also in the navigation pane. And on the far right there, you see a little X at the top of, across from the Document tab, that would allow you to close that table back up. Now, we're going to be opening and closing tables all the time. If you happen to make a change to the table, either to the data in one of the records, or if you add a field or change the name of one of your fields, or any change that you make, you're going to be asked to save the table before you can close it. We were just looking at that table in what's called data sheet view, which is going to remind you of a spreadsheet where you see the columns and rows. There are several views because these are not spreadsheets. They have a specific structure. So you'll be seeing that there are varying views that you can take a look at these different objects. And here we're seeing a query, manage contacts. It's being shown in data sheet view, but we are asking, this button is on the Home tab, the View Changing button. If we click that bottom part of the View button, as you see there, it will pull down the list of available views. And like I said, we're already looking at this query in data sheet view, but at the very bottom you'll see that Design View is highlighted, and that is what the user is getting ready to click. And so it's going to change the way we see this query to Design View. And for a query, Datasheet View is the list of records that was the answer to the question that you asked in the query. And Design View actually shows you the question. In Objective 4, we'll be navigating access record sets. Very simple. It sounds more complicated than it actually is, but this will happen in exercise 1-8, where you are going to use the navigation buttons and the ways of navigation in Access to get to different records. At the bottom of this datasheet view for the table, I think it's bulb usage list, you'll see that there are record navigation buttons at the bottom. And you'll also see that we're pointing to record 1 of 564 records. That is the current record, and it's the one at the top there. You can use that box to go to a specific record. So for instance, if I highlighted that 1 of 564 and I just typed in 75, it would take me to record 75 in the list. I can also use the buttons, the arrows, called navigation buttons, to go to a next record, and that just skips one, to go to the very last record in the database, or to create a brand new record, which would appear at the bottom of the list that I have there. And this is table 1-2 in your book. It just shows you some of the options that you have as far as keyboard shortcuts for navigating around inside of a table. In Objective 5, we'll actually be taking a look at modifying a data sheet's appearance. So in this figure 1-13, we're taking a look at the facilities table, and you see that there are column headers, which are really field names, facility type and management type, and we are choosing to hide those fields in the shortcut menu. So we've right-clicked, we've selected those first of all, and then we have right-clicked in the highlighted area, and we have that shortcut menu. And we're going to choose hide fields. And you will do this in your exercises. Those fields will be taken out of your view, but it does not delete the fields. It's simply to be able to see the data more clearly, or those fields may not be very important for someone who's maintaining the database to actually see them, and you can always unhide them if you do need to see them. We can also change the width of a field, change the width of a column, but the way a field is showing. And you see in this example, we're on record 1, but we've selected, it really doesn't matter what record that we've selected, because very similar to Excel, if you're familiar with manually changing the column widths in Excel, if you place your pointer in between the two columns, actually to the right of the column that you want to change, so we would be changing the facility name column in this case, you would get that double-headed arrow that you see there, the resize pointer, and then drag with the left mouse button to the left or right to increase or decrease the column width. We can also change the looks as far as color and font, size, and style. Saving and printing. Just like we can print any other file, we can print objects in a file for a database. What we're looking at is a print preview of the data sheet view of a table, the vendor table. Now in this class, instead of printing, because obviously you can't send me your printouts, you will be creating PDF versions of the things that you print or of the tasks that you do. Now in some cases when you're doing your lesson exercises in lesson 1, the first set of exercises that you do, I'm just going to ask you to do screenshots of those the certain steps. There's specific steps that I'm asking you to do screenshots. So check Blackboard for the specific step, because I tell you the page number and the step that I want you to do that screenshot on. And basically what you're going to do is just show me the picture of your screen after you've done the task that I'm specifying in Blackboard. That's the reason we went through the practice with doing the screenshots. You can do a full screenshot, or if you have that snipping tool and you're very good at using it and you want to just drag a box around a specific part of the screen, as long as you're showing me what I'm asking you for, that's fine. But in other instances, the book has specific requirements that it asks you to, instead of printing or doing a screenshot, to save the object in a PDF format, and you'll be attaching that PDF file to the assignment link in Blackboard. So in Objective 7, we'll be managing access files. Again, not as complicated as it sounds. On the Backstage tab, on the File tab, you will see information about the database. You'll see the options to manage the database, compact and repair the database. And this is something that you can't manually do, as far as I know. But when you compact and repair a database, it deletes things that aren't necessary and repairs things that might have happened during the maintenance of the tables, and makes the file as small as it can be. So that's about it for Lesson 1. If you do have any questions while you're doing your exercises, please feel free to email me or call me during my office hours. And the exercises that you have been assigned for Lesson 1 consist of actually working through the chapter, because the chapters are not just read through, they are actually exercises. So that's your first set of assignments, is to create screenshots as you work through that chapter, and then you'll have a chance to practice some of those same things in some of the other assignments that you have.